Okay, now we're going to talk about budgets. When I first started doing these programs, I only had a few $1,000 and I used it for just printing the vouchers, and I used complete volunteer work of my own time and everyone's time in the community, and it was effective, and we did a lot of cool programs with that. And Since then, what I've found is that the more investment that can be done in building up the capacity of the community at the beginning, it's sort of an accelerator for how things are going to work in the future and how sustainable the programs are going to be. And so our budgets have climbed and climbed over the years, but thankfully we're still not a giant international NGO at this point. So we want to be able to explain how these programs can be done quite cheaply. So in our initial phase, which we call our setup phase or phase one, we have our stakeholder meetings with the community. Cost for stakeholder meetings, again, like this could potentially be zero. In our systems here in Kenya, we're talking on the order of like $50 per meeting, and doing at least 4 of these meetings with different stakeholder groups in the community, like local leaders, like elders, the chief, the police officers, the different parts of the business community, and lots of mosquitoes here. Sorry, um, and uh, and so it's important. And sometimes a small amount of money paid to facilitate drinks or a venue for meetings is worth it, in lieu of leaving some people out. And some of the local leaders need that little push to sort of be involved. Um, in some ways, it's the cost of development in here after how many years of expensive development by large organizations coming in and people expecting some sort of handout. Um, but at the same time, the least amount you can show that these are sort of like handout type programs, the better off you are. So generally, the next step is looking at quotations and audits in the community. So even before we do a survey, we do kind of a soft political and financial sort of audit to look at just basic feasibility, and that has to do with the stakeholders themselves, looking at um, what are the cooperative businesses, or what is the capacity in the community, what are those anchor business or social enterprises going to be, are they financially viable at all? And if they're not, if there really is no place to start in that community, um, in terms of setting up a business, don't necessarily expect this to create that. You can get in a lot of trouble, and I've done this as well. Is go into businesses or go into communities that weren't viable enough already, that didn't have any sort of capacity. It changed the scope of the program. It meant that we were going to have to build something like a cooperative structure before really starting with that community. And then we do our survey, where we do our baseline and really look through the community and all sorts of different metrics. And then in the second phase, when we're developing these social enterprises, we're again going back and doing stakeholder meetings. We're explaining what was the result of the survey to the community, this kind of idea of action or collaborative research. If there's legal contracts to be made in terms of, if you're working with a for-profit social enterprise, for instance, as your target in the community of who you're going to be working with, quite often you need some sort of contractual agreement with them, so that if you're inputting inventory into their business, that they understand that like the profits on that inventory are going to be, or at least part of them are going to be tradable with these local currencies, and how the whole system's going to work. Additional stakeholder meetings. I mean, meetings are important. You've got to do them. And then actually investing or capacity building those social enterprises, doing management consulting, bringing in trainers. Quite often, it's like we have some kind of turnkey systems that we've done over the years, like developing oil presses and things like this. But quite often, we're in a state where we're not the experts in that business, whatever it is. So it's a matter of bringing in expertise and support for those local businesses. And then starting with marketing materials and branding events, and getting to this point of the pilot. And so the pilot is looking at all these communities around each other. I realized I've been skipping off telling you, dollar amounts on these things, but in terms of investment on these businesses, we're talking from the order of, a few $1,000s up to $15,000, and that's in Kenya. You can do a lot with a small amount of money here in terms of, like, let's say building a machine or adding inventory to a business, or doing some wholesaling arrangements, management consulting, bringing in people that are experts in that industry, coming in for a few months. We try to target things as little as like a few $100s to $600 on that scale of things. Marketing materials and branding, we're talking a budget of like maybe $100 a month for 6 months. Then more stakeholder meetings, actually getting to the point of doing the first, the currency printing for the pilot, and probably you're going to end up printing as much for the entire system that you plan to set up. Launching that pilot, studying the pilot, more meetings to, lots of feedback on how the pilot's going, what needs to change, how people need to be trained in different ways, and then getting to the point of the launch. And the launch itself, it's a big event, and that event itself can end up costing $1,000 in terms of doing banner printing and all that kind of stuff. And it really, of course, is going to depend on the community you're working with and the scope and scale of it. I mean, if it's a small rural village, yeah, maybe a few $100 to $1,000. If you're talking about a part of a city that you want to have like flatbed trucks with music on them and do marches and have local musicians come and things like this, these budgets can really grow. And then we get to kind of the post-launch phase, and these are quarterly meetings and updates. Again, stakeholder meetings, doing financial audits and quotations, doing your end-line survey, by the end of the first year, kind of ideally in the same month that you did your first survey. More community meetings, and overall, we say that the printing of the currency, we target, generally it's cost us about 10 cents, 10 cents on the dollar, and we target printing about 20,000 notes, and those notes are in various denominations. Usually we do 4 denominations. In Kenya it's a 5, 10, 20, and a 50, and they're denominations in the Kenyan shilling, and that saves us a huge hassle in terms of having to call it a currency. We can just say it's a voucher, it's based on Kenyan shillings, there's no exchange rate, we're just filling a liquidity gap, and it's backed by local goods and services, and we can be very specific about which local goods and services we're even talking about, and that saves us a lot of legal troubles, and makes it very transparent to government of what we're doing. So we're talking about the order of like $2,000 for 20,000 bills, and that should ideally feed a community, in terms of giving them all on the order of like $5 worth of currency for about 1,000 to 2,000 initial businesses in that community. And if you take that and then look at also all the the quotations and training and marketing and stuff, we're talking a total for just the currency printing and implementation of about $9,000. Again, these numbers can vary a lot depending on the community, and for the social enterprise development, investment, and training around that, we're talking on the order of like $15,000. So that comes to about $24,000. Now that doesn't include having salary, or having staff, and so we have 8 staff right now, and they cover all of Kenya, and so we've got 7 currency networks in Kenya. Some are just starting, some are a bit old, and that right now, those 7 networks are about 200 main businesses per network, and then a community of 5 to 10,000 people around those businesses that are using the currencies. And in terms of like setting up a regional office, we're talking on the order of something like in Kenya $3,000 monthly. And then if you want to really look at having a countrywide office and several of these regional offices, because ideally that one regional office should be able to handle 5, 6, 7 currencies. Within let's say each currency is within an hour distance from the previous currency. So having a regional office includes, we generally have pairs of people that go to the community, and one is focused on business development and one's focused on kind of social development and training. So we're talking, for a year of this program, like the actual activities and whatnot, coming to about 24,000, and then a year of a regional office being something like another 36,000. Again, starting with volunteers and everything, it's possible to do all this stuff. That's how I started doing it, and I find you get a lot more done if you can really count on having trained staff, and the capacity of those staff become bigger and bigger to serve more and more people. And so that's just where we've gotten to now. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. There's a lot of questions around budgets, and if you have very specific budget questions, who and how we're doing currency printing, for instance, feel free to ask those questions. And then we also have there's a lot of push right now to develop digital currency systems as well, which reduce some of the cost, and especially on the paper printing, but also some of the hidden costs in terms of like storing money and having to do renewals on a yearly basis, which is something I didn't mention here. But with the renewals of these currencies, generally we're stamping them or the backs, but it's a very time-consuming process, labor-intensive to actually have us doing this renewal. Although we believe the renewal is very important because it basically teaches people don't save this money. It's a spending currency, and that increases the amount of circulation people are experiencing. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I mean, overall, you could say this budget is in the $50,000 category, and about a year of implementation, and leading to a community that should be independently doing these systems. Although that 50,000 ideally is also building the capacity of an organization to be able to manage several of these programs. Great, thanks.